Tuesday afternoon is the deadline to protect players from the Rule 5 draft. Let's talk about who the Tigers may or may not protect. All today on Locked On Tigers.
You are Locked On Tigers, your daily Detroit Tigers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of Locked On Tigers. I'm, of course, your host, Scott Bentley. Today is Tuesday, November 19th, 2024. Thank you so much for making Locked On Tigers your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off of your first purchase. Welcome in, welcome all. Happy Tuesday, everybody. So, as we said in the cold open there, Tuesday is a pretty important day in the offseason. You know, when we do our offseason calendar and whatnot, and all of our great beat writers do it as well. This is the 19th is a pretty important day. Qualifying offers have to be accepted or declined. So that's important to keep in the back of your mind. I can't imagine anybody's going to accept one this year, but something to keep an eye out for as well. We'll kind of recap that on tomorrow's show a little bit as well. But very importantly, this is the deadline at 6 p.m. on Tuesday is the deadline for teams to protect players in the Rule 5 draft. So basically, all the players who are Rule 5 draft eligible, which happens at, it's always the last event in winter meetings. You take someone who's been in the minor leagues for 5 years. Usually it's 5 years, but if they're older than 18 when they join the organization, then it turns into 4 years. Either way, you're talking about a lot of players who are mostly career minor leaguers, and they all, if they're not added to the 40-man by their respective organizations on Tuesday, then they are eligible to be taken. And you can take anyone you want that's obviously, again, eligible in the Rule 5 draft, but you have to keep them on your roster for the upcoming season, your major league roster in the upcoming season. And if you were to send them back, then they go back to the organization they came from. Will Vest is a good example. The Mariners took him in the Rule 5 draft one year. They had him for about 6 weeks and then sent him back, and now he's Will Vest. So kind of funny how that works out sometimes. So we are going to go through the players who are eligible for the Tigers this year and discuss who makes sense protecting, who doesn't make sense protecting. There's some really interesting conversations, I think, with this. And I think to start, we have to start with the current 40-man roster because that is at 40 players. So if you're playing along at home, if you're doing this exercise yourself and you're trying to figure out, who you would protect and whatnot, who you would add to the 40-man roster, you're going to have to remove somebody currently on the 40 for every player that you add to the 40. So that's important to keep in mind. I think there's a few players that really jump out at me as kind of easier candidates to be removed and to be DFA'd. Mason Englert's probably at the top of the list, unfortunately. Ricky Vanasco. Brendan White is an interesting one just because he didn't pitch, I don't think, at all this past year, 2024, and showed some signs in 2023. He was a surprise add, actually, to the protection deadline from a couple of winters ago. He was a guy that wasn't really on anybody's radar to be protected from Rule 5 eligibility, and they added him to the 40-man roster to everybody's surprise, and then he pitched a lot in 2023. So we'll see what happens, but I think him not pitching a lot is definitely has his back up against the wall there. And then Ryan Kreidler. I think that most people are probably done with the Ryan Kreidler experience. He's getting a little bit kind of sneaky up there in age as well. It would not shock me if he did not make it through the winter. There's some fringe candidates too. Some people have put out like Alex Faedo. I would be shocked if Alex Faedo was a casualty of this deadline. I think maybe, later in the winter we get into some other deadlines maybe, but this one, I find that really hard to believe. Akil Baddoo, same conversation. I think there's just way easier candidates for the time being, but there's actually the non-tender deadline is this later this week. So we'll talk about Baddoo and Faedo for that matter again a little bit later. But When going into the players that are eligible in the system for the Rule 5, the question you have to ask yourself is the angle you view it at shouldn't be, at least when I do it, it isn't as much, do we have to protect this player as opposed to will this player get taken? And I know a lot of people are listening to that and you're like, idiot, those mean the same thing. I understand. They do. But from a perspective standpoint, right? Like I think that is the biggest question. The biggest question you have to ask yourself with every single one of these players, it isn't even as much anything to do with like their standing within the Tigers organization or if they're going to play baseball at the major league level this upcoming season. It is all nearly solely has to do with when the Rule 5 draft comes along, is another organization going to take them? Because you can skip your pick. The Tigers did for the first time in dang near a decade last year, and a lot of the good teams usually do, and the bad teams don't. That's pretty self-explanatory. So that is the question you have to ask yourself. As far as the definite, slam dunk additions, because usually there's a couple. There's a couple of, this is a layup. Like this guy's obviously going to get added, right? Like Wilmer Flores, when he was added, it was a no-brainer. It was like, okay, yeah, like he's very obviously going to get added to the 40-man roster. This year, I really don't think there's any 100% certainty slam dunk additions, right? Like Parker Meadows was another one. I remember talking about on this show when he was eligible, and it was like, all right, well, he's obviously not going to, they're going to protect him. I don't think there's anybody on this list that is a must add like most other years, which makes it a really weird one because that means there's a handful of very intriguing conversations. I think the closest player to a definite ad, the player that I think probably is the highest likelihood, is Tyler Madison. Madison was actually on the show. Was that his draft year? A couple years ago when he was coming out of college, coming out of Bryant, I believe. And was the 4th round pick back in that, I think that was the 2021 draft, and has really established himself as an impressive reliever. Now, the interesting thing with Madison is he did not pitch a single inning in the Tigers organization this season. Had a serious injury, did not pitch for the Tigers this year. And a great point that was pointed out by Chris Brown of Tigers Minor League Report, Motor City Metrics, etc. All the great things that him and Raj do over there. A fantastic point that Chris Brown made when he was discussing, his thoughts on the players that were eligible, is that almost makes him, Madison, more intriguing in the Rule 5 draft because there's a certain amount of days that you have to spend on the team that drafts you in the Rule 5 drafts, major league roster, before you are then like officially a part of the organization and you can, be a part of roster moves and whatnot. And the injured list would count as that. So a team could just take Madison, throw him on the IL, not even use a roster spot for him. And then when he's healthy, he's already met the minimum amount of days that you have to spend there to not be shipped back to the organization you came from. And then he's just gone. And he never even really pitched for this new team, but he's a part of their organization now and you don't get him back. So I think that is a really fascinating and good point, again, by Chris Brown over at Tigers Minor League Report. And I think that was, I already really liked Madison a lot, and I think that he was probably the highest likelihood guy, but that really kind of tilted me over the edge of like, all right, this probably makes more sense than anybody else. So let's get into everyone else on this list. And that's not to say that every single other name that we're going to talk about has like the same likelihood as each other. There's some different tiers I've broken it down into. But I do think that there is some really intriguing conversations. I could see anywhere from like 5 players being protected to literally 0 and everything in between. We'll talk about that a little bit more right after this. Got to talk to you today about our friends over at Game Time. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. They have all sorts of fantastic features as well. Game Time Picks, the new feature we're talking about today, uses curation and makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. But they have all-in pricing as well, where you can toggle the feature and get your total upfront. There's no surprise fees at checkout like some other people do. They also give you the lowest price guarantee. Well, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. All right, everybody, welcome back here. Segment 2 of Locked On Tigers. Appreciate y'all for tuning in, as always, making us your first listen every single day. Shout out to the everydayers that do tune in every day. We will, of course, be back tomorrow recapping the decision that is made at that 6 p.m. Eastern deadline for the Tigers. We'll talk about the qualifying offers situation around baseball, and we'll talk about the players that aren't protected by the Tigers and who is a candidate to maybe be taken in the Rule 5 draft. So let's get into the next tier of players in this group, which is players where there's a chance. There's a chance that these guys can make it. I can see a world where they are protected, and I would understand it. We have Liam Hicks, RJ Pettit, Tyler Owens, Chase Lee, Joseph Montalvo, and Lael Lockhart. So that's a decent group of players, which again is kind of my point throughout this entire episode, is like there aren't any must adds, but there's a ton of fringe guys, which really leaves you in an interesting position as an organization where, and as a fan watching an organization make these decisions where anything can happen, right? Montalvo was probably pretty easily, I think by some accounts, the biggest named prospect that the Tigers got at the trade deadline from the Texas Rangers. Obviously made a couple of deals with them when it was all said and done. So he's a guy, I think he's only 22 or 23 years old. So that's going to be somebody who has a chance. But again, you have to ask yourself, would another team roster this guy for half a season or a full season next year? And I think that there's a chance. There's a chance. He's got good stuff, but I also think that he's still pretty comfortably far away from the majors where you might be able to sneak him through as well. Lockhart's an interesting one. That's a lefty, getting up there in age as well. I believe he's in his late 20s, about 27 years old. Does not throw very hard, soft tossing lefty at that, but was a guy that was a workhorse for the Tigers. And as Chris Brown also pointed out, he, I believe Lockhart led or was in the top 2 in innings pitched in the organization, in the system at least, this season. So somebody that could, if they want a lefty out of the pen, or maybe want, lefty depth, could be somebody they look at. Liam Hicks. Liam Hicks is one of the, I think, underrated candidates to be picked up at the deadline on Tuesday. Hicks is a catcher that has really good contact numbers, really good on base numbers, and is somebody that, when we had that conversation earlier in the offseason, I should say, about what to do at the catcher position, if you're set on Rogers and Dingler, that's fine, but you're going to need a third catcher on the 40-man roster come spring training. Now, whether that's an internal promotion like Hicks, or whether that is a veteran free agent that you can stash in Toledo and kind of use as a safety valve if either of the top 2 guys get hurt or struggle, then, that's a conversation for a later day. But if you want it to be internal Hicks is a guy that so far in the lower level and kind of mid-level, as he's getting promoted through the minors, has been pretty consistent with his profile and his approach at the plate. A lot of pitchers have talked. There's a lot of coaches that have talked about him as well and how he handles pitching and whatnot. So I think that he's kind of an underrated candidate too. RJ Pettit, another guy that's a friend of the program, talked to him his draft year. Massive human being. We're talking like 6'8", just an absolute unit of a man, and has the velocity to back that up. He's a guy as a, pure reliever, could be somebody they take a look at. Chase Lee, another pitcher that I think has an outside chance of getting protected. And then Tyler Owens is actually one of my other kind of underrated guys to keep an eye on for this deadline. This is a guy that at his best can pump like upper 90s, can really hurl the baseball, has a really good changeup. And I think that if there is anybody from this group that is quote unquote the closest to major league ready in their current role, it might just be Tyler Owens as a pure reliever. I think that he probably is the most major league ready, given, him being a one inning reliever and kind of the stuff that he is offering. So Owens is a guy that I would really keep an eye on, and it would not shock me at all if he got protected on Tuesday's deadline. Let's talk about some guys that I think are more of long shots, but are still interesting conversations and definitely could be added. Andrew Navigato, Gage Workman, Roberto Campos, Garrett Buren, Yasber Sanchez, and Gabriel Reyes. Sanchez and Reyes, two solid relievers in the lower levels of the minors this season. We'll talk about them really quickly. First, when it comes to the rest of the list, I think that those are your guys that are a little bit more likely in this tier. Navigato had such a good year for the Tigers and plays a few different positions, logged a decent amount of time at short. I think with him, it is to me, if you don't protect Navigato, I think he's a really big candidate to get taken in the Rule 5. And again, we'll talk about that a little bit more on tomorrow's show. But I think there's still enough, man, it pains me to say it. I loved watching him play in Toledo this year, but I don't know if he is. If you add him to the 40-man right now, I feel like he's a guy where once you sign a couple of free agents and the 40-man roster gets tighter and tighter, that you're going to be looking around and going, well, he's now back at the bottom, and now we need that roster spot. And he's just going to get, not make it through the winter anyways. So, I really don't anticipate Navigato to be protected, but I think that he certainly deserved an opportunity with someone based on how he played in Toledo this year. And I'm hoping that he can sneak through and stay with the organization. That's kind of my biggest hope, is that the Tigers don't add him, but he can still stay in the organization and not get taken in the Rule 5 draft. Gage Workman's kind of a weird one. Gage Workman was taken in the Spencer Torkelson draft class of 2020, also played at Arizona State, is a plus defender at a few different positions, can play short, and just has not been able to hit whatsoever. Went on the developmental list, which is usually a sign of, the end is probably near on their time in the organization, right? Completely healthy, just a list that only exists in the minor leagues that you can send players to and be like, all right, we need to work out some mechanical stuff and just not have you play and just strictly practice for a couple of weeks. And he came back from the developmental list and absolutely raked. I don't know if it was exactly coincided with his return on the developmental list, but he, in the second half of this season, he was legitimately one of the best minor leaguers in the Tigers organization. I don't think that is enough to single-handedly be like, you know what? The last 3 years don't matter. I've seen enough. This dude, struck out at a 40% clip at one point in single A, but okay, he figured it out for the last couple of months. We're just going to put all that behind us. But I also think he's done enough to at least force a conversation. And at the All-Star break, there wasn't one. So a ton of credit to Gage Workman for staying the course, sticking with it, making adjustments, and forcing the hand of the organization a little bit. I give him all the credit in the world. Let's get to maybe the biggest name in this entire list. Okay. We'll do that right after this. Got to talk to you today about our friends over at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on NFL action all in one place. So you get a hunch in the middle of a game. You can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place all of your bets. Just visit fanduel.com to join today, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's fanduel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, everybody, welcome back. Your third and final segment of Locked On Tigers. Appreciate you all for tuning in. As always, let's talk Roberto Campos. So last year was actually the first year that Campos was eligible to be Rule 5, be a Rule 5 pick, and was the first year we had to have the conversation of, do we protect him or not? I think it was a pretty easy no last year. I know some people still wanted him to last season just because of the ceiling. I totally get it. But again, the question is not, the question you have to ask yourself is, would another team take this player in the Rule 5 draft? And would he keep a major league roster spot for that limit? Month and a half, 2 months usually. Campos took strides this year. And I think a lot more people slowly, we talked about this a few times throughout the course of the season, I think people are slowly getting back on the hype train because he did lift the baseball a little bit more. You saw the athletic ability, and he's still so young because we've been hearing about this dude since he was 15 years old. Like, he's still so young that I think I think he definitely made the conversation a little bit more difficult this year. I still think it's a long shot. I still think the Tigers don't need to protect him. And look, if they don't and they get pie on their face and in the Rule 5 draft, another team picks him up, then you should have done your homework a little bit more to the front office and realize that he was more of a hot commodity than we initially thought. But I really do think that they're not in danger of losing him in the Rule 5 draft again this year. Now, I think going forward, especially if he takes another big step this upcoming year, then next year you probably are going to have to. But I think that that this year you're probably okay not doing that again. Garrett Buren, another guy that threw a lot of innings for the Tigers this year, and I think that's everybody in this tier. The probably nots. We have Justice Bigby, Elizer Alfonso, Trey Cruz, Jose De La Cruz, Jake Holton, Tanner Kolep, Brady Allen, Corey Joseph, Ben Malgeri, Carlos Mendoza, Chris Myers, Austin Murr, Carlos Pena, Steven Scott, and Dylan Smith. I hope Dylan Smith can stay healthy. I loved Dylan Smith out of Alabama. In his draft year, he was somebody that even before the draft, before he was a Tiger, I was a big fan of. Really liked watching him in college and just has not been able to stay healthy. And when he's been on the field, he hasn't been super sharp. So he obviously won't be protected, but I do hope that he gets better. Justice Bigby, someone that was also on the program, I want to say last year, last offseason maybe, and had a ton of success in the 2023 season, gets promoted to Toledo. Did not have that same success, really struggled offensively. I don't think he is in any danger to be taken by another team in the Rule 5, but is eligible. Trey Cruz has had kind of an up and down career, pick from a few years ago now as well. They've moved him to center field. He's played second base. He's played shortstop. I mean, he's been all over the place. The offense has kind of been inconsistent. Can't imagine he gets taken, but is also eligible. Yeah, I don't want to just like repeat the names I just read you, but those are kind of I would say the bigger names of that tier and the players that maybe have a little bit more conversation to them than some of the others. As far as a final prediction, I want to start off with this. I don't think any of these guys are bad additions. I don't think there's a dumb ad here. And again, we'll talk tomorrow about the players that could be taken by another organization that aren't protected, right? Like we talked about with Navigado. But I think, man, it's tough because whoever is protected tomorrow, today, as you're listening to this on Tuesday, I think I can see like, okay, there's a profile here. Everybody I just listed, they have something going for them. And so the Tigers clearly believe in that profile and in that strength that they possess. Not a single name I just listed. And like there's a ton of more players that are eligible for this as well, by the way, right? Like that isn't everybody, but it's a lot. It's everybody who's been in the minors that's played 4 or 5 years, depending on your eligibility. Like that's a lot of players that aren't on the 40-man roster. So I think when it comes to like what I'm expecting, I think I'll say expecting Tyler Madison. Again, far from a guarantee. They might go nobody. They might go some players and not have Tyler Madison on there. But of the players that are eligible, I would say that he's probably in my head the most likely. But I think with everybody else, man, it's like I can see why you wouldn't and why you would. Like I could be very easily convinced on a large handful of these players and see the vision very easily of like, yeah, we're protecting him because, he throws 98, or we're protecting him because he has a lot of spin, or we're protecting him because he gets on base, or he has positional versatility, or he's fast. Like they're all of these guys have something going for them, and they're all young. So it really is a very unique. I don't think I've ever been, if you're a longtime listener to the show, you've heard us have this conversation now 3 off seasons in a row, 4 off seasons. Geez, been doing this a while now. I don't think I've ever been this up in the air about this deadline with my time on this show. Like usually it's okay, here's the slam dunks and nobody else is going to get added. And like that's fine. Like none of these guys are going to get taken by other teams. I think that's a sign that the organization is healthy. That's a Scott Harris quote. He said it in the press conference. Actually, I think it was Raj of Tigers Minor League Report that asked him about the upcoming Rule 5 deadline and the players that were eligible and what he was, feeling towards it. And Harris said he hopes he gets that question every year because the fact that it's a tough conversation to have means the organization's prospect pool is improving. And I genuinely believe that is true. This organization is deeper than it has been in quite some time when it comes to the farm system. So I think I'm willing to say I'm expecting, I think I'll use that word, Tyler Madison. Everybody else is kind of up in the air. I do think, again, if they do want to add a catcher internally, we talked about Liam Hicks. And I think Tyler Owens is a strong candidate as well, just because of the velocity and how, closer to Major League ready he is compared to everybody else. But I mean, who knows, man? They could add Roberto Campos. They could add Montalvo, certainly, right? He's in the top 30 prospects in the organization. Montalvo is. And they just traded for him, which is a point Chris Brown brought up. Like, you don't want to trade for somebody and then lose him immediately. So maybe there's a little bit more added pressure there. But I think I would probably just go with 2 or 3 ads. I don't necessarily expect a huge, here's like 7 guys that are being added to the 40. I'm kind of expecting somewhere in the, honestly, 0 to 2, maybe 3 range. And I think it's probably some combination of Madison, Owens, and Hicks. But like I said, any of these guys are on the table, and I've been wrong plenty about the Rule 5 edition thing. Brendan White was not even, I don't even know if we talked about Brendan White in the preview show, and he was added to the 40-man 2 winters ago. So, like, there's always a surprise in there. There's always a lot of trades as well around the league. I think that's important to bring up. Something to keep an eye out for. I don't anticipate the Tigers would be super active in that, given their current situation that we just laid out. But if there's a lot of players that that maybe have a chance to crack a roster somewhere else, or that basically if a team is like, okay, this dude's definitely getting taken in the Rule 5, so let's just trade him so that we can at least get something for him and he's not just poached for nothing, then they'll do it. And I don't think the Tigers are really in that position. I'm not sure they're in the alternative position either, the position of taking those guys. I mean, maybe if you get like a slam dunk, okay, this guy's going to be like a starter at the major league level or something, but I mean, as you can see, they kind of got their hands full with the prospect pool they currently have. So I'm not really anticipating the Tigers to be too active in the trade market. And like I said, tomorrow we will talk about the players that aren't protected, the likelihood of them being taken in the Rule 5 in December. Obviously, we'll cover the players that are protected and why they were protected. And then we'll talk about, what's it called? Qualifying offers, deadline, also Tuesday. Goodness. Completely lost my train of thought there, and I can't imagine anybody's going to accept one, but we'll talk about it anyway. Thanks for making Locked On Tigers your first listen every single day. Shout out to the everydayers that do tune in every day. We'll be back tomorrow talking about those things. I appreciate you all greatly. Let me know who you would add, who you think is going to get added, etc. And if the answer is nobody tomorrow by the team, don't be surprised. I really, based on what the 40-man currently looks like, I really don't. It wouldn't shock me if it was 0. But knowing Scott Harris, it wouldn't shock me if it was, 7 either. So we'll see. Peace and love. Going to therapy's dope. I'll catch y'all then, baby. Go Tigers.